This week is Banned Books Week, and as a reader and a writer, I have some thoughts on censorship. Now, censorship is nothing new, it's been around for a very long time, but I feel like in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a significant increase in the tension and the conflict between groups who are trying to push for more censorship, particularly in schools and libraries, and the communities who are advocating for the freedom to write, to read, to create, and share these stories with audiences. As I was going through my bookshelves, I didn't realize how many of the books that I own are on the banned books list. And actually, three of them that I still own are some of my most favorite and most loved books that I've ever read. So stick around if you want to find out what those books are. Hey everyone, I'm Zaida, and this is Read Books Get Lit. Today I wanted to talk about censorship. Now, it's a hot topic. It's been widely discussed very recently. In the last couple of years, there are a lot of strong opposing opinions from both sides of the conversation. So I'm going to try to keep this as mellow and as comprehensive as we can. I'm going to try not to go off on tangents, but if I do, apologies in advance. For some backstory, the Banned Books Week event, this movement, it started back in 1982, I believe, by the American Library Association and Amnesty International. They are still around, they are still heading this event, and it was all to bring awareness about censorship to a wider audience. It's all in advocacy for the reader and the writer to be able to read and write what they please. Not a hard concept, people, but apparently not a lot of people like it. I first heard of Banned Books Week during my first year of college. There was a display in the front of our library and it had pamphlets and posters. I remember picking up a bookmark and this little yellow button, it said, I read banned books. And that was sort of my entryway into my own awareness about banned books. Having reviewed the list over the years, most of the banned books that I've read, they fall under, I guess you'd call it, contemporary classics, that sort of genre. So things like, 1984, Bell Jar, those types of books. I haven't read a lot of the more contemporary works that have been added to the list, but there's definitely been a shift of a common thread or a common theme. If you look at these lists compared to 30 years ago to what's being put out now, you can definitely see that there are certain trends and certain topics and themes that are coming up more and more in the books that are getting banned. Now, I think it's pretty obvious by now that I am against censorship. I am a strong advocate for the reader and the writer to read and write as they so choose. I will note that I realize I grew up in a neighborhood, in a state, in a household where I was allowed to consume material and content of all kinds: books, movie, TV shows, music. There weren't any restrictions that hindered me from discovering stories or finding new authors or watching different types of movies. I acknowledge and I realize that that in itself, it is a privilege. Not everybody had that. Not everybody grew up in a community where there was that ability to have those choices, right? That being said, part of being a human and part of growing up and maturing is having this innate sense of curiosity. I really think that our sense of curiosity is one of the best qualities of the human race by far, right? We want to know why something is done. We want to know how it's made. Where did this come from? Well, when do we do this? It's a natural part of growing up and maturing and evolving as a functioning human being. So when you being a school, an organization, a government, leaders in power, when you start putting these bans and you are actively censoring books, media, anybody who has an opposing opinion from your own, you are denying people of their innate sense of curiosity. You're denying people of their choice to make a conscious decision for themselves whether or not they want to consume this media or not. And I personally think that that is fucked, and I don't agree with it. Okay, I got a little heated and a little worked up just now, so we're gonna take it down a notch. And I wanted to show you some of the books that I pulled from my bookshelves. These books are typically found on banned books list. It might depend on which list, regionally or nationally, but oftentimes you will find majority of these books on some sort of banned books list. So let's take a look. On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Read this in high school. Loved it. Still love it. Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. I think technically the entire series is on the banned books list because witchcraft or something. I don't know. Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I usually don't like dual POVs, but this was the first book that kind of got me into it, so I love it. The Color Purple by Alice Walker. An American classic. I stand by that. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Didn't read this until I was in my late 20s, but man, what a trip. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. You gotta read this. Just read it. Everyone's favorite angsty literary teen, none other than Holden Caulfield in The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. This nearly made my top 3 favorites, but it barely got beaten out by somebody else. But this is definitely up there. Animal Farm by George Orwell. If you haven't seen the animated movie, go watch it. It was frightening, but also really fantastic. And another George Orwell classic, 1984. The list would not be completed without 1984. So after going through all of my books, I did pull 3 that I consider to be some of my top favorite books ever. And I wanted to start this off with Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I did not read this in school. I know that this is often a required reading in high schools. I didn't read this till I was in my mid 20s, and I was instantly fascinated with the entire concept. I really love this book for 2 reasons. The first one being just what an epic, like, deep dive look into the lengths that a person or people will go to survive and how quickly they will revert back to primitive behavior. If you're not familiar with this book, I'm not going to spoil it, but SparkNotes version, a group of boys are stranded on an island. They kind of go wild, and a lot of scary, frightening things happen. But really, the shift and the timeline of how, like, quickly people turned on each other and people, like, just started acting out was very shocking. I can only imagine how shocking it was when this book actually came out in the 1950s. So that's one of my first favorite things about this. The other, I love so wholeheartedly that William Golding made these characters preteens, right? They're not quite children, but they're not quite like older teenagers. They're in that pocket right between where they're like, 11, 12, 13 years old. There's already a lot of shit going on when you're that age. And to add in this sort of like life or death catastrophic event, I feel like the age that these characters were, it just heightened everything else that happened in the course of this book. So those are my 2 favorite things that really made this book stand out for me. Definitely recommend if you haven't read this already. The second book I want to share is one of my favorite books ever, 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 and that is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I could go on and on about this book and the movie, the musical, but for the sake of time, I will refrain. This is probably my favorite, and I feel like one of the strongest depictions of friendship in contemporary American literature. And not just the friendship and relationship between, Ponyboy and Johnny Cade, but all the Curtis brothers, all of the greasers, all of their childhood friends that they have known for years and years. And there is such a sense of love, of care, of dedication to one another. And that really sort of was highlighted for me when I read this for the first time. I've read it many times since then, but the friendship aspect, I only hope that I can one day write friendships as strong as the one in this book. The other thing that I really enjoy about The Outsiders is the introspection that Ponyboy goes throughout this story. And he's questioning his identity as a greaser, as Ponyboy Curtis. There's a question in life, right? Are we the product of our environment? And Ponyboy is absolutely having this internal discussion with himself. You know, am I just going to be a greaser for my entire life? Am I meant to stay here in Tulsa, do what my brothers do, and that's the end? But what if he has other aspirations? What if he has other goals and he wants to leave town? He wants to see the world and see who he can be beyond the boundaries of Tulsa, right? And I think that's something that we can all relate to that at some point, where we are questioning whether or not we should, if we are able to push the boundaries that we have given ourselves or that have been given to us, right? So that's definitely something, especially as an adult, that I really take from The Outsiders. Again, definite recommend if you haven't read this already. The third book that I want to share is, again, one of my favorites. It is a little bit on the nose, but for good reason. So, last but not least, this is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I just want to start off by saying how much I enjoy Ray Bradbury. I definitely want to read more of his short stories, but if you haven't read Bradbury, this is a really good place to start. It is, like I said, a little bit on the nose, but Fahrenheit 451, in my opinion, really is sort of the epitome of censorship and the dangers of hive mind mentality. It really poses the question of, at what point in time are you ever going to? Do you ever want to? Will you ever start asking the questions and start thinking for yourself? And I think that really is sort of the root of the fear involved in censorship. Is It's the fear of the unknown, and it's also the fear of losing the power you have over the community, over people, in which you are making their decisions for them rather than them making their decisions on their own. It's kind of all wrapped up in this book, in my opinion. Again, one of my favorites. It is extreme. The events that happen in this book, definitely extreme. But are we as far off from what's happening in this book? I don't know. I don't know. And that is a discussion for someone with way more worldly knowledge than me. So I will end it there. And on that note, we have reached the end of the video. If you're still here with me, thank you for sticking it out. You know, I I do want to bring topics and videos to this channel, and I'm aware that it could spark heated discussions. That's never my intention. That's not what I'm after. But I do think that healthy conversations, whether we have, opposing views on the topic, that's fine. That's actually a good constructive way of going about it. So if you are for or against censorship, if you read banned books, if you're participating in any banned books week activities or events, leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you and get the conversation going. As always, if there was at least one thing you liked about this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It can definitely help me grow, and I would really appreciate the support. But I think that is all for now. I will see you in the next video. Until next time, bye.